param parastam gahanādanadim ekam nivishtam bahudā guhasu sarvālaya sarvacharācharastam tvameva shambhu sharanam prapadye tvameva shambhu sharanam prapadye tvameva shiva sarvaṃ mahadeva om tvameva sarvaṃ shiva mahadeva om shanti 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 namo vishvashariraya vishvaikātmyavabhāsine nitya pratyavamarshaya shambhave vishvasiddhaye om shanti shanti shanti. Om, I salute my Guru, Shambhu, who is verily Shiva himself, inseparable from his Shakti, who is the transcendent reality beyond the abyss of transmigratory existence. That reality is eternal, not two, prior to all experience and endless. I praise that reality which manifests herself in various ways in the hearts of the variously manifested beings, that reality which is the ground of all, wholly immanent in the moving and unmoving. Salutations to Shiva, who performs the magic of this universe, who is eternally self-aware, who is the non-dual essence of the universe, who is embodied as everything. Om, peace, peace, peace. Jai Ma. So, welcome one and all. Today I have quite the treat for you. I hope you'll enjoy, because we're going to discuss a new text. Actually, it's a parallel verse, or two verses that are parallel to the text that we're studying right now. So don't be alarmed. I know I have this habit where we're like studying one text and then I get excited about another text and then we digress and then we like do that text for 2 years as an addendum. And then we come back to the text that we started like 2 years ago. You'll have to remember that the whole Vijnana Bhairava Tantra series is like kind of like a footnote because it's an addendum. Okay, no one will ever say the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra is a footnote. It's a very important scripture. I don't mean it in that sense. But it's kind of like bracketed within our Pratyabhijna Hridaya series. So we were discussing the Pratyabhijna Hridaya. Remember, there were we were talking about the verses, 20 or so verses of the text. And we got to verse 18. It was like three and a half years ago, maybe even 4 years ago now. We got to verse 18, and verse 18 gives a slew of practices. And then we were like, hey, look, these practices are directly referencing practices in the Vijnana Bhairava. Let's look at some parallel verses from the Vijnana Bhairava. So we took a step away from the Pratyabhijna Hridaya Sutra. It was a dangerous step to take because then we started a next 3.5 year or so course on the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. Because once we looked at those verses, I was like, wait, this is too good. We probably should study the whole text before we do the Pratyabhijna Hridaya. So then we started from verse 1 and we went all the way down. Yeah, so it was way back when. Some of you might remember that. So we were studying that beautiful text, Pratyabhijna Hridaya Sutra, by Abhinavagupta's disciples, by his disciple, Kṣemaraja. And so Kṣemaraja gives us these very succinct 20 verses, but having composed 20 Sanskrit verses on the absolute essence of reality, he then composes a Karika, a commentary on those 20 verses. So it's very wonderful. You get to study his succinct, essential teaching along with his own analysis and interpretation of that teaching. Now, what he's trying to do is very interesting. What Kṣemaraja wants to do is he wants to essentialize, he wants to give us a TLDR for his guru's work, Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti Vimarshini, which is itself a very extensive commentary on his guru's work. So Kṣemaraja's guru is Abhinava, Abhinava's guru is Lakshmana Gupta, and Lakshmana Gupta's guru is Utpala Deva. And Utpala, perhaps the founder of the Pratyabhijna lineage, arguably the philosophical founder of the lineage, he composed a beautiful text, Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karika, the stanzas on the recognition of yourself as God. It's a highly dense philosophical work in very difficult Sanskrit, and of course it's contrasted quite nicely to Utpala Deva's devotional work, which is also very popular, which is very regularly chanted by the Brahmanas of Kashmir. It's called the Shiva Stotravali, a garland of hymns for the Lord, a garland of hymns for Shiva. So that's a beautiful text, very devotional, very autobiographical text, where Utpala expresses his own frustrations and his own aspirations as a non-dual master of the tradition. And he expresses all of this in a very dualistic way, which I think shows you what the non-dual masters of our tradition are like. They're not like dry jnanis, as Sri Ramakrishna would often say, Mother, please don't make me a dry jnani. In that they're not just like philosophically gifted, sitting in a cave, meditating on void or anything. They're full of love and devotion, and they write poetic works of rapture. So there's a nice text also by Utpala Deva called Ishvara Siddhi, which means establishing God. So again, this is non-duality, but it's theistic non-duality. So everything is one reality, but that reality is a theistic absolute, meaning it's divine. So you have to prove that. I mean, otherwise it's just void, or it's clear light of the void, or it's just Brahman or something. Advaita Vedanta will say it's existent. It's not really God in the sense of the word that we're using. So to establish theism, Utpala Deva gives us this beautiful, very concise Sanskrit text called Ishvara Siddhi. And there he says, duality is kind of like ignorance. I kid you not, they're non-dualist after all. So duality is kind of like ignorance. But the light of the self shines brightest in the darkness of duality. So I'll choose duality every time. He says, Svatma Eva, Shiva, Lord Shiva alone is my very own self. That being said, the light of my knowledge shines brighter in duality. So you'll see a very devotional flavor in the Shiva Sutravali, which is of course contrasted to the very incredibly philosophically rich flavor of the Ishvara Pratyabhigakarika. But it's a difficult text. So Abhinavagupta writes not one but two commentaries on it. One is the Birhad Vritti and one is the Laghu Vritti. So it's like a short commentary and he has a long commentary on this text. So what Kshemaraja is doing is continuing that tradition of commenting upon this Mula Shastra, if you will, this root scripture of the Pratyabhigya lineage. So we were studying that, Pratyabhigya Hridaya Sutra, and we got to verse 18, and then we digressed and did the whole Vijnana Bhairava Tantra thing, which is very, very exciting. So we do that every night, every Thursday night, every week. So today, we're studying the Paramartha Sara of Abhinavagupta. I noticed many people were coming into our classes who are quite new to the tantric system, to the tantric non-dual system, and it's quite a rich, sophisticated, elaborate system. So to study Tantra, and most importantly to study philosophical Tantra, that is the exegetical works of Shaiva Siddhanta and of non-dual Shaivism, etc., you need to come at it in a very systematic way. Otherwise, you'll easily get overwhelmed by all the various models and ideas and thoughts. So the Paramartha Sara is perhaps the most important text in the tradition, in that it's the most succinct but very beginner-friendly introduction. Pratyabhigya Hridaya Sutra, the reason I chose that text is also because it has that same function. It's a concise text and it offers beginners an introduction to the tradition. But when we were studying it, we realized actually it's quite complicated. It's incredibly complex. The way that Kshemaraja has arranged the text requires a lot of background understanding. And it requires some rooting in the Shaiva Siddhanta, and just you have to be part of the Shaiva world to truly, really derive the... See, some people comment upon the text as non-dualist, but they're not immersed in Shaiva duality. And so this stuff becomes really exciting once you have that grounding in Shaiva duality. So I realized Pratyabhigya Hridaya was a bit beautiful, concise, and a wonderful introduction, but it was a bit coded, if you will. And partly because Kshemaraja is writing for an inside group. The group that he's addressing are probably already familiar with all of these esoteric terms. He's probably just addressing his Guru Bhais, Guru Bhaginis, and his own students anyway. So Paramartha Sara, like I've been saying, is very special because it addresses an outsider group. That is to say, it addresses an audience who might be coming to this material for the first time. So in that sense, the Paramartha Sara is called a Prakarana Grantha, a beginner's manual, or a primer. I like that word, primer. So studying it is very fruitful. It sets you up for a deeper understanding of the entire tradition. And like I said in the very first class, studying it is very fruitful in the sense that it can trigger spontaneous realization. As we learned, bondage is not caused by some real thing called mala. Rather, mala is nothing but ajnana. And ajnana, in a single flash of insight, can be dispelled. When the full moon of knowledge rises, it dispels the darkness of ignorance. And from that moment forth, you will be enlightened. So the argument is that by studying Paramartha Sara, without having been formally initiated in any other way, without having done any kind of puja or ritual worship, without doing any other thing outside of studying the Paramartha Sara, for the right kind of person at the right time of their spiritual journey, simply studying the Paramartha Sara can trigger that recognition, which in this tradition we call pratyabhigya, spontaneous recognition of true self. So that should happen moment by moment, by the way. I always feel it's very funny when people say, oh, I'm enlightened. As if to say it's done, it's over. No, it can never be over. In each and every moment, you are constantly rediscovering yourself. That's the point of pratyabhigya. The point of pratyabhigya is to say that this is not a philosophy of being, it's a philosophy of revelation. I once heard Shaiva Acharya say it that way, and I love it. I love the way he praised it. It's not a philosophy of being, Because a philosophy of being is, oh, okay, I know it, I'm done. It's static. Brahman, the absolute nirvishesha, nirguna Brahman of Advaita Vedanta can be a bit like that. That's why in the Advaita Vedanta community you have this kind of infuriating trend where everyone just seems to claim they're enlightened. Hare, look at how they behave. They're not desireless, they're not full of freedom and joy and devotion, and yet they go around saying, oh, I had the insight. I mean, it's good. It's a good start. But what we're saying in India is much deeper than the neo-Advaitins of the West want to give us credit for. They read one Ramana Maharshi book and they think they're done. They think they've mastered Advaita. Not keeping in mind that the masters of Advaita in India meditate all day and all night. Many of them are monks, monastics. They don't take into consideration that the tradition is maybe deeper than a mere intellectual insight. But even then, that intellectual insight is something that kind of like acts like a sodium-potassium channel. It's either open or closed. It's either all open or all closed. So the idea is like, okay, now I know that I am Atman, or I know I am the self, so I'm done. I'm liberated. But in the Shaiva world, in the non-duality of Tantra, it's not quite like that. In each and every moment, you are rediscovering yourself again and again and again. It's not like you're rediscovering something new, but the self is ever new. It's nityo dita. It always arises anew. So you can never be enlightened. Because the moment you become enlightened, you just go on in these series of recognitions and recognitions and recognitions, meaning everyone you see you recognize as yourself. Everything you see you recognize as yourself. So you're always confronted with the rapture, the poetic rapture of your fullness. So you have the attitude of a devotee probably, and you don't ever feel like you're done. There's always something new to discover, something new to learn. You won't go on the Reddit thread and like say, I've discovered the secret of the universe, now I'll, start teaching classes or something. It's not like, we're always devotees, we're always learning together. That's the spirit of pratyabhigya, recognition philosophy. So anyway, the Paramarthasara is nice because when we study it, we can get this recognition. And once we get this initial recognition, we can keep having that recognition over and over and over again as a result of this initial recognition. So today we'll talk a little bit about that because we'll talk about Shakti Pata and what makes it possible for a person to have this recognition upon hearing a teaching just once. In any case, we're now at the point in our text where we're talking about the 6 sheaths, the 6 levels of embodiment, if you will. Actually, they're not sheaths because in the Abhinavagupta sense or in the Tantric sense, they're all actually equally real aspects of the self. They're just various degrees of manifestation of the self. Whereas in the Shankara sense, when he's commenting upon the 5 layers of the Taittiriya Upanishad, he calls them Maya Koshas. Pancha Maya Koshas, meaning they are sheaths, but sheaths of illusion. So they're illusory selves. They're names and forms. They're not the real self. The real self is a negation of these 5. Now the 5 that you're going to encounter today are different in a sense than the 5 that you encountered in the Taittiriya Upanishad. So we'll quickly sketch out the teaching of the Taittiriya Upanishad, then we'll sketch out this concept of the 6 sheaths, and we'll look at the nuance between those 2 ideas. Basically, it's an inquiry into the self. What exactly is the self, and what are the 5 coverings of the self, and what are their relations to the self? Am I the 5 coverings? Am I more one covering and less some other covering? Or are they emanations of the self, shaktis of the self? Are they illusory obscurations of the self? What exactly are these 5 coverings, and how do they relate to malas, which we discussed 2 weeks ago? So that lecture on the 3 malas is intimately connected to this lecture on the 6 layers of the self, because both lectures are about bondage and about liberation. So by understanding why it is that we've come to be bound, just understanding that itself can point the way to liberation. So knowing what the bind is also synonymous with releasing it. That's an interesting idea. So understanding the 6 layers, we can also understand how it is that we came to feel limited when really we are infinite self. That's the first thing. We can explore that. And I meant to give this lecture last week. See, because we had just finished the 3 malas lecture the week before the last. And the next step after the 3 malas lecture is to do the 6 sheaths. But I got distracted because verse 35 is all about... verse 34 is all about the 4 states of consciousness. And I got really excited because that's a really, really deep and profound teaching. And so I wanted to just preface verse 34. And then last week, my intention was to do the lecture that I'm going to do right now. But then I got excited by verse 34 and the whole hour and a half went by just like that. And we were discussing the 4 states of consciousness. So let me just quickly review the material from last week. Oh, that's a dangerous proposition. But where are we? Okay, let me just take you to this verse. Here it is. Shrishti Sthiti Sanghara Jagrat Swapna Shushuptam Iti Tasmin Bhanti Turiye Dhamani Tathapi Tayanavritam bhati, a profound verse. And it kind of references this idea of obscuration. Can the self really be occluded? Can it really be obscured? And here we're saying no. Consciousness can never, in any case, be obscured, occluded, or impeded. So consciousness, the self, is the unimpeded flow of perception. The unimpeded flow of reality, if you will. So here the verse says, Shrishti Sthiti Sanghara, creation, maintenance, and destruction. Creation, maintenance, and destruction of what? Necessarily the three states, which are waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So the first state here is called Jagrat, and we talked about the Mandukya Upanishad, and we saw how in verse 3, Jagrata is the waking state which corresponds to the stula level of reality, the gross level of reality. And this is kind of objective in nature. That's why it's called Vaishvanara, common to all people. And the oversoul here is called Virat. So this is the waking self with the waking world. That's Jagrata. So that's created and destroyed. Every day, awareness generates, as it were, the waking world. And I experience the waking world as the waking self. So the waking self, along with the waking world, appear. And then they also disappear. So they are coming into being, they are emitted into reality, they are held in reality, and they are dissolved in reality. Shrishti, Sthiti, Sanghara. So that's a decidedly tantric teaching that Turiya, consciousness, has the capacity, it has the power to project, maintain, and dissolve. Now in the Mandukya Upanishad, as commented upon by Gaudapada and later by Shankara and later by Anandagiri, you see that this idea of creation, maintenance, destruction is not given to Turiya. Rather, it's something that maybe Ishvara does, and Ishvara is just consciousness plus Maya. So consciousness in Maya, as the oversoul, is called Ishvara, and this Ishvara or Saguna Brahman, this is the deity that creates, maintains, and destroys. And even this deity has three levels of existence. There's the Virat, which is the physical existence of the deity. There's Hiranyagarbha, the golden womb, which Sai and I were discussing last week. That's the dream reality, the slightly more subtle form of God. And the subtlest form of God is called Ishvara, the causal God. So God as Ishvara is causal, God as Hiranyagarbha is subtle, and God as Virat is physical. So even God has a physicality, subtlety, and causality to him as a causal being. So anyway, that being said, in Advaita Vedanta, God creates, maintains, and destroys. But importantly, God is also subject to Maya. So when you dispel Maya, you also dispel God. God is ultimately to be transcended in Advaita Vedanta, probably in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, where you go beyond the Sabija Savikalpa state, meaning you go beyond the experience of Saguna Brahman and experience that which is beyond the beyond. So that in that state, there's no God. And so consciousness does not create, maintain, or destroy. This is a very important nuance. In Advaita Vedanta, Brahman is nishkriya, without action. Brahman does not have Shakti in Advaita Vedanta. So Brahman cannot create, maintain, and destroy. Rather, it's God who does that. And God is merely something that you experience while in ignorance. Oh, hello Tatiana. So good to have you from Portugal. I think Mapi is also from Portugal, but I don't think she's here today. But our Portugal Sangha is growing, which is very exciting. Is Mapi here? No. Usually Mapi will come, but I don't think, oh no. But anyway, so welcome Tatiana, it's so good to have you. Welcome. So, the idea now is that creation, maintenance, and destruction, in this verse, it might be attributed to the self, Turiya. But it might also not. I can also see another commentator saying, no, not necessarily. We're not necessarily saying that the fourth creates, maintains, and destroys. The Sanskrit, the grammar just says creation, maintenance, and destruction, as well as waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. They all appear and disappear in the fourth. But my interpretation, my gloss of this verse is as follows. What's being created, maintained, and destroyed is the waking state, dreaming state, and deep sleep state. So in Mandukya verse 4, we learned about swapna, the dream state. Here we learned that it's the subtle, the sukshma, and the self here is called taijasa, and the oversoul is called hiranyagarbha. So that's the swapna state, dream state. Then we also learned about the deep sleep state, which is very profound. And so the Mandukya Karika actually devotes 2 verses to it, not just one. Shushupti means deep sleep, and that's the causal state. And here you are pragya, and the oversoul is called Ishvara. So these, these pairs, Vaishvanara, Virat, Taijasa, Hiranyagarbha, Pragya, Ishvara, they're just a technical way of saying the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreaming world, the deep sleeper and the causal state, or the seed state, the Bijavasta, the lack of a world. Then in verse 7, we get something very important. We learn about Turiya, the fourth. But we learn that Turiya is not actually a fourth state. Rather, it's the one in which the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep come and go. It's the one reality in which the other 3 come and go. That's the teaching from the Mandukya Upanishad. The only real difference here is, one, The waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states are said to be created, maintained, and destroyed. So that's a Shakti concept. But the second thing I think which is very important, which you also sometimes find in Gaudapada, but the argument here is that nothing can obscure the self. So they all shine, all these things, creation, maintenance, destruction, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, they're all experienced in the fourth. And yet the fourth, tathapi, and yet it is avritam, it's anavritam, meaning it's unveiled. It shines, bhati, it shines without any kind of obscuration whatsoever. It's an unimpeded flow of light. So nothing that ever happens, nothing that you could ever think. Thank you, Moksha. Mokshadas, good to see you, G. Welcome, welcome. Nothing you could ever do, think, or say would ever defile you. And that's what we learned yesterday. Remember in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra? We learned kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, matsarya. We learned about these 6 things: lust, anger, greed, delusion, intoxication or pride, and jealousy. So these 6 things, we learned about the gochare, the field of these agitating experiences. So in the field of all this horrible stuff, actually, the self is unstained. Avashishyate, the self remains. So the self is not affected by impurities because there are no impurities for the self. In fact, there are no impurities on the level of the mind, body, or world either. So knowing that, knowing that is very powerful. So to have that realization, Abhinavagupta gives this Taranavritam Bhati. So although these states shine in the Dhamani means in the realm of the self. Although they shine in the fourth, yet the fourth shines unobscured. So though they shine in the fourth is not obscured by them. So that was the discussion we had last week. I thought it was a very beautiful discussion, and that's why it took an hour and a half, because I actually only just wanted to glimpse it and then go back to this verse, which is what we're going to study today. Because this one comes first, and then comes this 4 states of consciousness thing. So I just ended up doing this one. So now you'll forgive me. I ended up doing this one. So forgive me. I'm now going to backtrack a little bit if you don't mind, and just comment upon this verse a little more. I want to make one more point though, if you don't mind, about that verse 34. Do you remember how we were studying the self in Shaiva dualism yesterday? And also we were studying it last week. So in Shaiva dualism, you learned that the first thing is that there is God. Asti karta. There must be God. Why is there God? Because jagat karya darshanat. Because in this world we observe cause and effect. And so what's the cause of all the causes? So what's the mahakarana, if you will? And it's also kind of intelligent design theory, because the argument is that what the world is a very complex creation. Because in this world we find gender. And the fact that there's male, female, and neuter, the fact that there's a gendered complexity in the world, that itself implies some kind of intelligence. And so it's not just a karana, not just a cause, but a karta, an agent. So there must be God. Asti karta. Why? Because jagat karya darshana. And who can be God? That's the next question. So we've established God, but who is God? God is the destroyer. Because the only person who can destroy something is the person from whom that thing first emerged. So the dissolution of something also implies that thing as the source. Sorry, the dissolution of something implies that the place of dissolution is also the source of emission. So a complex argument is given about why Kali / Rudra / Shiva would be the natural choice for God. So in Shaiva Siddhanta, which is Shaiva dualism, there is God, and God must be Shiva. Okay, that's the first claim that we're getting. That comes in verse 1. Then in verse 2, we learn about what kind of God he is. It is. And we learn about all pervasion. We learn that God is transcendent, like the gold is something other than the ornaments. And yet we also learn that God is immanent. The ornaments, golden ornaments, are not something other than gold. That example comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. It's not actually given in the Shiva Jnana Bodha, which we've been studying. But instead they talk about vyaptito, pervasion. And they talk about karmanusarataha, the idea that this entire universe exists so that the anus, the individuals who are actually non-different from Shiva, they can all just like work out their karmas or something like that. So we get this idea of what God is and then what God does in verses 1 and 2. Okay, but verses 3 and 4 are about the self. And verse 3 first says that there is a self. See, verse 1 said that there is a God, and then verse 2 says what God does. Similarly, verse 3 says that there is a self, and verse 4 tells us what the self does. And so why is there a self? Remember, this is in response to Theravadan Buddhism, classical Buddhism, which argues that there is no self, anatman. So the response is, there is a self. How you might find this convincing or not, and the debate has of course been going on for centuries. It's a wonderful and beautiful debate, and we can learn so much from both sides. But the argument that we get is, as we discussed last night, netito mama udrekat aksharoparati bodhataha swape nirbhogato bodhe bodrivat. Asti anu stanau. There must be a self. Asti, there is. Anu, a self in the body. That's the idea. So in the body, there is a self. Or I would prefer to translate this as there is an embodied self. Or the embodied person is. Why? First argument. And there are maybe 4 arguments here. The first argument is netito. To negate the self requires a self. And this is a nyaya term. It's called pratiyogin. You can't negate something without also asserting its negator. So the counterfactual, it's called. Now, try to doubt your own existence. To doubt your own existence itself implies that you exist at least as the doubter. This was Descartes' realization. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But really, that translates probably to something like, I doubt, therefore that I am. I asked myself, do I exist? And I must exist to have that question to begin with. So, netito. Who realized anatman? There was a realization. And in Mahayana Buddhism, this is claimed. And it's claimed in the Sanskrit text Mula Madhyamika Karika by Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna, of course, is a tantric alchemist. Allegedly, he's a Naga and a tantric alchemist, a very important philosopher in the second, 3rd century, like that, AD. And he says in that text, the Buddha taught a Paramartha Sat. This Paramartha Sat, the absolute reality, he claims it in order to defeat those who claim Buddhism is nihilism. It's not. Those who say, oh, Buddhism is about no self, no God, it's nihilistic. It's a very unfair critique of Buddhism. That's not at all what they're saying. And similarly, Buddhists who criticize Advaita Vedanta as being eternalist, also that's not really fair because that's not the claim. Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism are essentially saying the same thing. So much so that many philosophers regard Shankara crypto-madhyamika, crypto-Buddhist, because they're really saying the same thing in different terms, It's just that you get the word Brahman in Advaita Vedanta, whereas you get different terms, like clear light of the void or Buddha nature in Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. Anyway, in Nagarjuna, in Mula Madhyamaka Karika, he's saying, no, the Buddha taught an absolute truth. It's just you can't affirm it, you can't assert it, you can't say anything about it. To do so would be to kill it. The definition killeth, So the Buddha was reticent about naming this truth, but he was also reticent about denying it. It's neither this nor that. It's neither both nor neither. That Chatushkoti. Anyway, all this aside, the self is negated in Buddhism, but the act of negating the self argues that there must be a reality. That reality is what is called the self. So netito, negation implies existence. Next, mama udrekat. There is this arising sense of mindness, and it applies to the 4-year-old body that I had. It applies to the adolescent body that I had. And so for some reason, I feel a sense of continuity throughout all the various forms that this body has taken. How is it that I can look at a 4-year-old picture and say, oh, that was me? There was some mamata, some sense of mindness or continuity there. And then I don't think the same thoughts that I thought when I was 4. Actually, I probably still think the same thoughts I was thinking when I was 16. But hopefully all of us are thinking different thoughts now from when we were teenagers. And when we were teenagers, we were thinking different thoughts from when we were a child. So all throughout our lives, our minds are changing. Our personalities are changing. And yet, don't you notice there is no disorientation? You're not confused by this changing body or by this changing mind. You still feel like the same one. If there was no self, if there was no common center, how would you have that experience of mamata or continuity? If it was all just discrete flashes of sensation, cognition, then how would there be that continuity? So if it's assumed, meaning if it's an illusion, like a rock we assume a rock exists if we see something covered in moss. But there might not actually be a rock there. And we assume that there's an axe when we see a rust-covered axe. But actually below the rust, below the moss, as we were saying last night, there might be no rock. So how do I know there's this continuity after all? But anyway, in any case, this verse implies the very fact that there's continuity, the fact that I feel myself to be the same one, regardless of all the changes in the body, the fact that I feel myself to be the same one, regardless of all the changes in the mind, that implies that there is such a one. And that one is here called the self. So this is the second argument for the self. Netito, the self exists because it can negate. Secondly, because it feels the mindness, the sense of continuity. But thirdly, and this is a more direct response to the heap or bundle of impressions idea. So in classical Buddhism, the idea is that there's like a bundle of impressions, and it gives the sense that I am a self, when really there's no self. It's just the panchaskandhas, it's just vedana, it's just sensation, just thought, just impressions. Now, aksharoparati bodhataha. Uparati means to withdraw. Akshara means the sense perceptions. So there is a state in which you're not experiencing anything whatsoever. It's a meditative state. But it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it just happens randomly. You just like zone out or something. You're not really looking at anything. Your eyes might be open, but you're not seeing. And you're also not thinking anything. 1,000-mile stare or something like that, You're embodying the 90s archetype of the manic pixie dream girl, dream boy, dream person. Just vacuous and vapid. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So if you're like that, you'll realize that there's a self. Why? Because you're not experiencing a bundle of impressions. There's no heap. And so according to Chandra Kirti, they both stand like bales of hay. If one falls, the other must fall too. Mutually codependent arising. But in one experience, the first bale of hay fell, which means all the sense impressions have fallen. All the akshara, what do you call it? Prameyams, like all the objects of perception, they've all gone away. But the second bale did not fall. So in a state of meditation, it's possible to recognize that even when the first bale of hay falls, meaning akshara uparati, when you withdraw all the sense perceptions, this is called yogic, in yoga it's called pratyahara, then the self is still there. And then the next argument is very important. The fourth argument is about deep sleep. So swape nirbhogato, when you're sleeping, you have an experience of no dream. And that itself is something that you are aware of. So bodhe, swape nirbhogato, when you're sleeping, you had no experience. Bodhe bodhritvāt. However, when you're awake, you know that. The fact that you know that you had no experience at all implies that you were there in deep sleep. And deep sleep is the ultimate example of akshara uparati, the withdrawal of the sense faculties. So when there is no mind and no body, in other words, when there is no bundle or heap of impressions, there is a self. Okay, that was the first argument we got. So therefore, there must be a self. But then what kind of self is it? And so in the Shaiva dualism, what we learn is that the self is associated to the sense objects the way a king is associated to the ministers. Oh, sorry, not sense objects. Antakarana, inner instrument. This is very important because there are schools of Indian philosophy like Mimamsa that argue that the self is the intellect. And this, of course, Buddhism is rejecting. And they're right to do so because the ego, the intellect, these are all just instruments. They cannot be the self. In fact, the word for ego is hankara, which means a false sense of self, a fabricated sense of self. This is where we're proving no self. We're not saying the ego is the self or the intellect is the self. And the argument for have you actually seen the rock? You've only seen the moss. Have you actually seen the axe? You've only seen the rust. That argument against the self on the grounds that the self has not been experienced is very fair because the self cannot be experienced. If it's something that is experienced, it's no longer the self. It's an object to the self. And that's what we learn in verse 3 of the Shiva Jnana Bodha. We learn that the self is anya. It's an other to the antakarana, the inner instrument. It's not the mind. It's not the intellect. It's not even the ego. And Shankara sings, Manno buddhi hankara chittani naham aham. I am not. See, already I am because I'm negating. But what am I negating? The mind, the intellect, the memory, and also my sense of self. It's a really interesting idea. I'm negating even my personality, my egoity. That is the self which negates it. Anyway, so having said all of that, I am without I. Yeah, it is an experience of the self, but it's different. It's qualitative difference. And Lala, hello, Jaima, you're going to take us into a very deep and beautiful philosophical discussion about like infinite regress. And let's hold off on that for now. But it's not quite experiencing the self. The self cannot be experienced in that way. But that's where I think the bulk of the response comes from Advaita Vedanta to our tradition. They say, look, your vimarsha doesn't work because it's making the subject into an object. You can't, the light can't shine upon itself in this way. So we have to get into a very technical discussion of swat prakasha and vimarsha, and it's a very wonderful and beautiful dialogue. But anyway, a little outside of the scope of this current thing. But the point to make in verse 3 of the Shiva Jnana Bodha is the self is anya. It's something other than the mind, than the intellect, than the egoity, than the memory. But the mind, the memory, the intellect are not other to the self, in a sense. In one sense, the gold is something other than the ornaments. But in another sense, the ornaments are nothing but gold. So here we get the metaphor of mantri bhupavat, the king and the ministers. Like we discussed last night, the king is different from the ministers, but the ministers would be nothing without the king. So the ministers enact the will of the king, if you will. Similarly, the self, which is the embodied soul, enacts her will through the five senses, through the five organs of action, through the mind. But she's something other than the five senses, the five organs of action, and the mind. That idea. So we had that. But then we had something even more interesting, which I thought directly relates to the verse that we just talked about, verse 34. Then we learn that the self experiences the panchaka avastha stha. It goes through the five states. So now we learn in the Shiva Jnana Bodha that there are 5 states. The first state is called waking, second state is called dreaming, third state is called deep sleep. But look, in classical Shaivism, the fourth is a state. Haven't you heard your Advaita Vedanta teacher say, the fourth is not a state, the fourth is not a state, the fourth is not a state? In fact, I myself last week emphasized very strongly the fourth is not a state. Yes, because the fourth is consciousness. Seen from the point of view of the 4 model, it's 1 plus 3. And the 1 is called Turiya. Mayam, Sankhyaṃ, Turiyam. We only count it as fourth because it's transcended to the 3. But it's not actually a fourth. However, you should know that in classical Shaivism, the fourth is actually a state. It's a state. That's why, some Advaita Vedantins get very upset when people talk about it as a state. But no, you guys, like in the yoga tradition, which is very much influenced by the Shaiva tradition, you can't deny that that language is used. That Turiya is a state. What kind of state is it? It's the state of samadhi. It's a state of pure transcendence. So you can be awake, you can be asleep, you can be deeply sleeping. You can be awake, you can be dreaming, or you could be deeply sleeping, or you could be in this fourth state where you experience neither waking nor dreaming nor deep sleep. And yet that too is an experience. It's called samadhi, the experience of turiya. So many Advaita Vedantins in the Advaita Vedanta tradition won't like this analysis. They don't really like samadhi that much. I mean, they do, but they have to be like in a yogic lineage to like samadhi, like Totapuri. So they feel like samadhi is not necessary. It can be helpful, but it's not necessary. And so you'll see Gaurapada kind of make fun of yogis at the end of his chapter 4 commentary in the Mandukya Upanishad. But in any case, yogis, Shaivas, Tantrics, they have spoken of the fourth as literally a fourth. That's why Shankara has to say Mayam, Sankhyaṃ, Turiyam. It's only the fourth when you count from the point of view of Maya. You see, Shankara is doing some gymnastics here to try to make it sound like the one. It's actually the fourth. Its name is the fourth. And so, in a sense, there's a fourth state. But there's also a fifth state. And so as Rudradeva is rightly pointing out, by the way, I want to show you some of Rudradeva's art later. It's really beautiful. But as Rudradeva is rightly pointing out, there's another state called Turyatita, which means beyond the fourth, which is the fifth state. So the fifth state is called Sahaja Samadhi. So Turyatita is what I think Advaita Vedanta means when it talks about the fourth, which is the experience of the transcendence in immanence. So you can be awake, you can be dreaming, you can be in deep sleep, or you can be in Samadhi. And fifthly, you can, through Samadhi, through the experience of the transcendence, be also in the world and still experience the transcendence. So this is like coming down from the roof to only to realize that the steps are made of the same thing as the roof. Brick, lime, and brick dust, as Sri Ramakrishna would give that metaphor. So when you experience consciousness in Samadhi and then you come out and you say everything is consciousness, that's Turyatita. So these are 5 states. And now in the verse that we just, in the Shiva Jnana Bodha, in that verse, it says that these are stations. The word is stha. Remember I said last week, stha is very similar to the English station. Now the idea is that these exist actually, and the self actually goes to these stations one after another. Remember, Shaiva Siddhanta is dualistic, it's theistic, it's dualistic, it's kind of non-dualistic also. It's dualistic come non-dualistic at times, because it uses 28 of the agamas, not just 10. It still includes 18 non-dualistic agamas, also qualified non-dualistic agamas. But anyway, it's pretty much dualistic, it's theistic, and it's realistic, meaning it takes a realism approach. Unlike Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, actually there's some forms of realist Buddhism too, like Theravadan Buddhism is kind of realist in some senses. Anyway, not to get too far afield now, the important thing to point out just for this part is that the self goes to these stations, and there are 5 stations. So in Shiva Jnana Bodha, verse 4, we learn about the 5 states: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, samadhi, and the transcendence immanent state known as Turyatita. But last week we learned about the 4 states. So it's interesting to note that Abhinavagupta is offering only 4 states here, not 5. Why? Probably because a wider audience would be more familiar with the Mandukya Upanishad and less familiar with this idea of 5 states, which is very much within the Shaiva Tantra world. So for a beginner, 4 states makes more sense to talk about, and he's using a very, I think, Advaita Vedanta sort of analysis here, except he's adding one piece, like I pointed out last week, on Shakti, the creation, maintenance, and destruction. Okay, now I'm satisfied with that. So last week we had an hour and a half class, but I realized I still wasn't quite done. There was a comparison I still wanted to make between Shaiva dualism and its idea of the 5 states as stations versus Shaiva non-dualism and its idea of the 5 states appearing in the self, as opposed to the idea of the self visiting these stations one after another, like in this realist model where the stations actually have an existence outside the self. Instead of that, Shaiva non-duality says, no, these are created, maintained, and destroyed within the self. And now I hope this next thing is going to be a treat. We're going to talk about a text that I really love. So here's the parallel verse that I want to study. It's called the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. So let me introduce you to this text a little bit. It's an intoxicatingly non-dual text. What happens is Indra is trying to get these elephants to fight. So the setup of the text is there's Indra, and Indra is using magic or some kind of siddhi to get these elephants to battle. And so then Shiva comes. And it might not be Shiva, by the way. Instead, it could be one of Shiva's demons. The name Virūpākṣa means odd-eyed one, which refers to the three eyes of Lord Shiva. So it is a name of Shiva. Shiva is called Virūpākṣa, but also one of Shiva's demons is called Virūpākṣa. So it's not quite clear whether it's Shiva or whether it's Shiva's demon. But anyway, I'm going to say it's Shiva. So Shiva comes, and Shiva says, "You're making elephants fight? Ha ha ha. Cute. Watch this." And then he claps his arms together like this, and two mountains come together and crash. And Indra's jaw is like on the floor. It's like... And the question he asks is, by what bija did you attain that power? Like, what bija mantra did you use to do that? I want to do that. So notice, the text starts with Indra and his hubris. Indra wants to like conquer the elephants. And then Shiva comes and shows him something even better. Conquest over the mountains. And Indra now gets this like very left-hand path sort of tantric ambition to get siddhi, to get power. So he wants to be a siddha, he wants to be accomplished in the sense that he wants to have power. So he literally goes to Shiva for power. And Shiva gives him a teaching that will enlighten him. So that's why it's a very beautiful tantric text. Very tantric in that its central question is, how can I make mountains move? But it's a bait and switch. Because you think it's going to be about magic and stuff. And it is, but not really. Because it's about something far deeper. It's very subtle. You're going to realize that you are the mountains, you could say. Right? Yeah, but you can see this. Yeah, okay, good. But that's the thing. So what the Buddha taught, this is very important, is not necessarily what Buddhists preach. Not always. And what Jesus taught is not necessarily what followers of the Christ preach, right? That's an important point. So there's no self. Even Nagarjuna says very carefully, you must understand shunyata carefully. Because if you don't, it's like grabbing a serpent from the wrong end. Right? That's the idea. It's like catching a snake from the wrong head. Durga grihitva, what does he say? It's like sarpa durga grihitva, I think was the Sanskrit. You're like catching the snake from the wrong end. So if you miss the teaching on anatma, and if you miss the teaching on shunyata, then it can easily become something it's not. And so it must be handled very subtly. In any case, what these Shaiva dualists are responding to might not even be the Buddha's position, but the position of Buddhism at the time. See, be very careful here. I'm not giving a teaching as much as I'm trying to represent a text in this class. And by representing the text, it necessarily means we have to represent the philosophical climate in which that text was written, which might be different from the modern views on Buddhism or like what you might have learned. You know, like that's an important thing also to consider. So I'm trying to understand this from within the contextual history of the text, actually. Which, by the way, is kind of odd because in America, here it's all about gurus. You know, and gurus, they're not interested in necessarily being accountable to texts or to traditions. They'll just say whatever, and what they say is what they've experienced. I'm not necessarily doing that. I'm not necessarily saying, oh, these are all my experiences. I'm just trying to represent a text. So there's a difference between guru and acharya, you could say. An acharya is trying to teach from a text, and guru is teaching from, maybe you could say, their charismatic experience or something like that, you know. So it's different. So yes, I'm not saying this is true of Buddhism. It's just what Shaiva Siddhanta understood. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, but it's their response. So this is Shaiva Siddhanta. But then in the non-dual Shaiva world, the argument gets much more complicated, much more subtle here. And we'll see that in the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. So in the virūpākṣapañcāśikā, there's a very important point, that Indra wants power. And Indra, you could argue in the virūpākṣapañcāśikā, is the ego. He's the jiva, the individual embodied soul, who is always interested in power. The ego always wants to control and be dominant and be powerful and be loved and respected and all of that stuff. That's what the ego wants. So it's not wrong then for the ego to look for this in spiritual life, but it's a bait and switch, because by giving the ego what it wants, the ego self-destructs. Or rather, that's not even the right language. That's a again, more Advaita Vedanta kind of language. The self is wrong. No, the self is true. And the self is all that exists and everything is the self. And so this self, you could say you can destroy the false self, but wait, this is where we depart from Buddhism. There is no false self. Every self is real. Even the most contracted form of self is real and valid. And so Indra is not a false self. He's a real self. But the real self can become even realer, if you will. But that's not even true. I can't even give it a hierarchy of realism. It's just two different kinds of experiences. So Virūpākṣa, if we understand Virūpākṣa to be Shiva, we can understand him to be the most expanded self possible. And if we understand Indra to be the Jiva, the ego, we can understand him to be the most contracted self possible. So think of this virūpākṣapañcāśikā as a Tantra. And it's a dialogue, not between Shiva and Parvati as we often find in the Tantras, but between Shiva and Jiva. So here the Jiva is represented by Indra, the archetypical symbol for ego, who by the way in the Puranas gets constantly humiliated. The Advaita Vedanta world, the Buddhist world, the Puranic world, they all have a bad view about the ego. They think you should destroy your ego, etc., right? But not so in Tantra. Ego is not a problem in Tantra. Contracted ego is not a problem either. It's still a phase in Lord Shiva's self-expression, but expanded ego is the goal. So the purpose of spiritual practice is to go from a contracted ego to an expanded ego, to go from Jiva to Shiva. But it's not to say Shiva is better than Jiva. It's just the natural unfolding journey of the Jiva to want to be Shiva, and it's the natural journey of Shiva to want to be Jiva. So Shiva eva grihitva pashubhavaha. Shiva alone takes on the form of an embodied soul, right? And that embodied soul, through grace, desires to become the expanded consciousness, to become self. Not to say disembodied, but to be embodied as something far greater. So that being said, think of this as a conversation between Shiva and Shiva. Shiva in expanded form and Shiva in a contracted form. Isn't that a beautiful way? I hope it's a beautiful way to look at it. So usually Shiva is talking to Parvati, right? But Parvati is none other than Shiva. As we learned, kumbha gatas cheti tatayavate, tatayava banyate. Kumbha means pot, gata also means pot. So pot and pot, these are two words that say the same thing. Similarly, Shiva and Shakti are two words for the same reality. So you can't say they are two, they are just two ways of describing one thing. So having said that then, when Shiva is talking to Parvati, when Bhairava is talking to Bhairavi in the Tantras, he's just talking to himself. It's no different with the virūpākṣapañcāśikā because here Shiva is talking to Indra, and Indra being the ego, the contracted self, is another form of Shiva. So Shiva contracted is here Indra, and Indra expanded is here Shiva. So Indra and Shiva are representing like Parvati and Shiva in the classical tantric sense. So it's still a tantra in that it's still a conversation. So what's the conversation about? It's about the self and about what it is to be a self. Like, what is the self? So that's the question we're going to continue. So in the last few discussions we had about Shiva Jnana Bodha verses 3 and verse 4, we learned a few ideas about the self. And we looked at ideas in Buddhism, parallel ideas about the not self, and we made some, comparisons between those two views, etc. Now we get an even more refined and beautiful idea about the self as consisting of 6 layers. So let's look at that for a moment. Now in Paramarthasara, so this is the teaching that we meant to unpack last week. So here it is. Deha prana vimarshana di jnanabha prapancha yogena atmanam veshtayate chitram jalena jalakara iva. How strange is it? The word chitra can be translated as wonderful also. How wondrous is it? And I did actually translate it as wondrous in this verse. Here, chitram, the word chitram here, I translated as Lord Shiva's wondrous play. Krida means play, so Lord Shiva's wondrous play. So that chitram, this word here, can be understood to be strange also. It's kind of perplexing that Lord Shiva does this to himself. What a masochist. That he wants to be contracted Indra, getting elephants to fight, and then he wants to go on this long journey of like self-expansion. What nonsense. It's weird. So the word chitra means weird, wonderful, strange. So here, I translated as strange. So I hope you can see why. Because this is expressing a state of spiritual bondage, which is not bad, but I want to imply that by using the word strange. And then there it's expressing a state of theistic rapture. It's the same word, but there I'm translating as wondrous. So hopefully this gives you a view as to how translation works. The same word can be translated in 2 ways depending on the kind of flavor we want to get from it. So that's also an important point, why the Sanskrit primary source is important too. Anyway, I've translated this as chitra, meaning how strange is it that the atmana means self, veshtayate, wrapped itself. Veshti means to be wrapped. Veshtito means to be covered or surrounded by. So I use the word wrapped, pariveshti, but you can think of it as covered or surrounded by also. Anyway, how strange is it that the self wraps itself up by considering itself to be deha, which means body, by considering itself to be prana, which means mind, vimarshana, which means intellectual concepts, and even the universe, prapancha, of ideas regarding the void. Nabhaha. So nabhaha means non-existence, right? And the idea is that there is a universe of concepts about non-existence, which is supposed to be a joke. The word prapancha means something like galaxy or universe, and it's a joke here. And again, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say it, but it's like a subtle, maybe, jab at Buddhism a little bit. Because of the idea of like, wait, you guys, you're talking about nothing, but you sure have a lot to say about it. Something like that. So it's a sweet joke. It's meant to be light and playful, between friends. So you could say like the traditions are so eerily similar in almost every which way that sometimes a little bit of this push and pull is nice also. It's like, you can think of it as like a kind of flirtation, a bit of negging here and there. It keeps everything interesting. Anyway, so here he's saying it's weird. Like people think they're not the self. How weird to think that there is no self, right? A very weird idea. Like I was telling you, when Acharya Timalsinaji was commenting upon the Shiva Jnana Bodha, he was bringing up the prima facie purva paksha position of Anatman, and it was very cute how he said it. He was like, so if there's no self, who am I then? It's like just a very cute, succinct way of saying, then like, who am I, the one who discovers Anatman? So here, it's like, if it was void, it's interesting that there's so many different ways to understand the void. I mean, in the Madhyamika world, you have Svatantrika Madhyamika, Prasangika Madhyamika, Shentong interpretation Madhyamika. It's a very complex and philosophically nuanced world. So it's not nothing. The void is at best no thing. It's not nothing. And Nagarjuna himself says it's something. It's just not anything you can understand or mentally construct. So there's this idea of the void. So how strange is it that the self wraps itself up by considering itself to be the body, the energy, the intellectual concepts, and even the void, the universe of ideas regarding the void, just like a silkworm wraps itself up in a cocoon. So the word jalakara means maker of the web. Sometimes it's translated as spider, but I don't think that's a good translation because a spider is not bound by its web. But maybe that's a better translation then, because neither are we really bound by these six cells. But it seems to me that this is my conjecture, the flavor of this verse is about bondage, because it comes right after all these verses about ignorance, which comes right after this verse about what is called the malas. So we learnt about the supreme veil, anava mala, pashutva. We learnt about the maya mala or maya mala, the experience of duality. And we learnt about the karma mala, the adjectival sense of the word karma, which means doership. So the idea that I am limited, that I am different, and that I am the doer. These are the three things that bind the soul. And we learned that these malas, in that lecture 2 weeks ago, we learned that these malas are not real. Rather, ignorance alone is the cause of bondage. And it is that ignorance which is called impurity by the scriptures. With the rising of the moon of perfect knowledge, that ignorance is uprooted completely. When pure consciousness is revealed as a result of the destruction of all impurities, that is indeed what is called liberation. Therefore, by means of this Tantrasara, I will reveal that highest reality. So in verse 4 of Tantrasara, Abhinavagupta clearly tells us that there is no real thing called mala. It's just ajnana. So that which the Shastra, the Shaiva tradition calls mala, which the Shaiva Siddhanta took to be like actually ontologically there. Here they're saying, no, it's not really there. But it's not there either. It's ajnana. Kind of like in the Advaita Vedanta Maya sense. Anyway, so the reason why I think this cocoon and silkworm idea is better, because verse 32 comes after a bunch of verses on darkness and ignorance and bondage like that. So this is sketching out the problem which the rest of the text is then going to solve. So the problem here is that the silkworm sometimes gets trapped by its own cocoon, and the cocoon is of its own making. That's really the boggling thing. The mind-boggling thing is that like this silkworm like actually dies in its own house. Isn't that crazy? It happens. Every now and then we find dead silkworms inside their own cocoons. So that's what happens to us. We dry up inside because we don't really know what we are at our essence. So this verse 32 is about being something deeper and more meaningful than you've ever felt yourself to be before. Not to deny that the body, the energy, the concepts, all of that is also real. Right? Yeah, so sad. Sai is saying also, some caterpillars have died in the cocoon. They never became butterflies. So yeah, pupating is hard work. And so I think that's the idea that is evoked by this Jalakara. Also, Kavishama, is this Kavishama from the Kali Mandir? Laguna Beach Kali Mandir? I thought I saw you on Monday, but I was like in the flow of things and I don't think I got a chance to say hello. But if this is that Kavisha, hello Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. I'm so happy you're here. we're hosting a Kali Puja tonight. So if you're in the area, you're more than welcome. You and Amma and Appa and all are more than welcome to come to Kali Puja at the house tonight. Jaima, so glad you found us and came. Good to have you, Ma. Jaima, Jaima. It's nice to meet people in real life and then see them on the Zoom screen, as opposed to usually how it works is I first meet people on the Zoom screen, then see. But this is nice also. Anyway, so we get this verse. Okay, so I just want to show you verse 32. Now, I want to show you some parallel verses from the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. So virūpākṣa means aksha means eyes. Virūpākṣa means virūpākṣa, the odd-eyed one. Pañcāśikā. So these are 15 teachings from Virūpākṣa. And it opens with this beautiful verse, which I think captures the heart of the text. So this is a new tantric text. As my digression for the day, I only want to do like 3 verses from this text, if you don't mind. So it's hopefully this will be a very short little piece, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So the opening verse is Namo Vishva Shariraya Vishvaikātmyavabhāsine Nitya Pratyavamarshaya Shambhave Vishvasiddhaye. Good, Tatiana, thank you. So this is a wonderful idea. Salutations to Shiva. The word Shambhu means Shiva, so Shambhave. Namo, salutations to Shambhu, Shiva, who Vishvasiddhaya. Doesn't that sound familiar? Vishvasiddhaya here means the one who performs the magic of the world, the magical display of phenomena, the magician. This word should sound familiar because in the Pratyabhigya Hridaya, we saw in verse 1, Vishvasiddhi Hetuhu. Right? We heard that the goddess awareness, Chitti Swatantra, in her freedom, is the cause of the magic of the universe. So we translated that word Siddhi to mean power, to mean magic, to mean performance. But it could also mean established. So we salute Shiva, who establishes the universe. He is Nitya, eternally, Pratyavamarshaya. So he's eternally self-aware. To Lala's point, here awareness is self-aware. The word vimarsha is very important. He's eternally self-aware. He's always self-aware. And importantly, he is non-dual. Eka. Vishva ekatma. He is the non-dual atma, essence or self of the universe. And this is arguably this is the most important phrase in the verse. My favorite phrase in the verse. Vishva shariraya, meaning his body is the entire universe. So God is that being whose soul is consciousness and whose body is the universe. That's the TLDR. The essence of this verse is God is the essence of everything, but the world is nothing but God's own body. God is the world. And yet God is something beyond the world. Transcendence and immanence. So I've translated this, I think, in the following way, but of course I'm probably going to edit this. Salutations to Shiva, who performs the magic of the world. He is eternally self-aware. He is the non-dual essence of the universe who is embodied as everything. There's another verse here, but I forgot it. So I'm just going to move on to there's actually 2 opening verses, but this is the first of 2 verses. But this is the other one. And I have to go look around and poke around on the internet to see if I can find the second verse. But I remember it was something about consciousness. So the first verse is about Shiva, the second verse is about consciousness, and those 2 verses are Mangalacharana. But this is the first verse proper. So let's look at this first verse. This should remind you a little bit of verse 9 in the Paramartha Sara, no? Let me just quickly take you to verse 9. Sorry, I'm scrolling a little quickly here. Okay, so in verse 9, you got this idea. The idea of grace, Lord Shiva's grace. So it says, this ādarshe malarahite idea. Just like a face shines in a mirror free of impurities, exactly like this shining one, Shiva, shines resplendently in that intellect which has been made spotless by Lord Shiva's grace. So this idea of Shaktipāta. The word Shaktipāta is not used in the Shiva Jnana Bodha, but of course it's implied. Grace is implied. So Shaktipāta means grace. Yes, and Shiva, Shaktipāta is very important. This grace of Lord Shiva. And so Vimala means spotless. How does the mind become spotless? In other words, how does it reflect its own true nature? Through grace and through grace alone. And that grace is called Shaktipāta. So we get that same idea of Shaktipāta, of grace, in this verse of the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. Because he was worthy of being taught. Prishta here refers to Indra. Prishta iti, prashna, he asks a question. In the form of linga, in the form of anumeyena, which means through some inquiry. So again, the word Shaktipāta is here. So I've translated this as follows. Because he was worthy of being taught the ultimate truth, that comes from tattva, upadesha, tattva, adhikaratva. So Indra, so here's Indra. He has the adhikari. Adhikari means competence. So Indra is qualified to get the upadesha of the highest truth. So because he was worthy or qualified to be taught the ultimate truth, how? As a result of this. Shakti nasya, because of the grace of Lord Shiva. In other words, as a result of the descent of grace upon him, Indra, here Indra is now being referred to by Prishta, is asking a question, prashna. He's putting forth the question. And thus, Shabdim Diksham Pravarta Yitumupakramate. Upakramate. So, thus the discourse begins. Shabdim, which is an initiation in the form of a verbal initiation that will answer the question. So again, you should understand that sankramanam, transmission, doesn't necessarily just come through a mantra. It can come through a verbal discourse. If you ask your guru a question and your guru gives you an answer, that answer itself is a kind of diksha, a kind of initiation. And that's the way the word diksha is being used here in this text. So diksha means immersion into Shiva, samavesha, which also means recognizing that you are Shiva. How do you recognize that you're Shiva? Because your guru tells you. And so here, Indra, he has grace. By the virtue of grace, he now has the qualifications to learn the highest teaching. If you didn't get this grace, you wouldn't even be asking. The fact that you're asking means you have this grace. So people often ask me like, oh, am I worthy of Diksha? Hare, if you're worthy, Diksha will chase you. You don't have to chase Diksha. Diksha will come and find you. Somehow or other, you'll be initiated. But if you haven't yet been initiated and you want to be initiated, you might ask yourself, am I ready? The very fact that you want to be initiated proves that you're ready. In other words, first must come Shaktipata, then only can come Diksha. Shaktipata comes from Shiva, according to one view. And once that Shaktipata comes, that itself is Diksha, in the sense that you now want to know what the truth about yourself is. At that point, you'll probably approach a guru and get like the human equivalent of the diksha, which is being given a mantra or being given a teaching. So here, Shiva himself is come in the form of virūpākṣa. So again, this is referencing the idea of Shambhunatha, like guru kind of idea. Like the guru is Shiva. So your guru is supposed to, in this tradition, be a living representation of Shiva to you. So you have to see your guru as Shiva. Just like how Virūpākṣa might be Shiva's demon. But the Shiva's demon is also synonymous with Shiva. Do you see how much is going on in just the characters, the dramatis personae of this text? You learn so much about Shaivism just from understanding Shiva and Indra and their relationship. Anyway, and Virūpākṣa and Shiva and their relationship. Having said that, I think this is the way we'll translate the verse. Because, um, I hope you can appreciate the use of the word initiate twice. Initiate in the first sense means to start, and initiation in the second sense means spiritual initiation. So I want you to see that they're the same thing. Initiating a discourse and being initiated. That's just the kind of fun that I was having with these words, initiation. Anyway, because he was worthy of being taught the ultimate truth as a result of the descent of grace upon him, Indra asked this question. And thus the discourse begins in order to initiate the verbal initiation that will answer it. Right? Okay, now what's the verbal initiation? Here it is. This one line could initiate you. This one line could liberate you. So here's what Shiva says. Oh, it's beautiful. Vimatipadamaṅga sarvaṃ mama caitanyamātmanaḥ śarīramidam śūnyapadādīlāvadhi dṛśyatvāt piṇḍavat siddham. Oh, dear one. The word anga here means dear one. So the guru always speaks this way. Because to the guru, you're like his child, her child. It's most beloved person. The guru will die for you, actually. The guru loves us so much. So it makes sense that Shiva, who is God, and the guru, who is Shiva incarnate, would start with my dear, my beloved. Oh dear one, Anga. Which shows you that this teaching is given only in compassion. It's not a $500 workshop on the internet, or it's not like how expensive ayahuasca retreats can be. But in the original cultural context in which the medicine was provided, it was all happening in a communal setting where it's all very free and lineage based, and it's very different now how we sell spirituality. And so the word here, oh dear one, is implying that it's through compassion that the teaching comes, not because Indra is paying for it in some way. Indra wants to know. And when the student is sincere, the teacher will, and if the teacher is sincere, and only a sincere person can be a teacher. Insincere teacher sounds like an oxymoron to me. But if the teacher is sincere, the teacher will address the student with love and compassionately give the answer. So the student here, Indra, he's asking a question. Now here, the teacher's compassion is manifest in the word anga. Oh dear one, sarvaṃ, all this, from the void, shūnyapada, to ila, to the play of the divine, including even that which is heretical, vimatipadam, which means including that which is profane, he says. since it appears in consciousness, dṛśyatvāt, that's what the word dṛśyatvāt means, is my very own body. Śarīramidam, piṇḍavat siddham. So these two words mean it is verily established as my own body, for I am consciousness. I've taken some liberties here because a direct translation would be even that which is gross, or even that which is heretical, my dear. All of this, my conscious self, body, this. So that's the direct translation. It would be like, all of this, including the heretical, is verily my body, for I am consciousness, or myself is consciousness. And then he says it again in a different way. Everything from the void all the way up to the play of the divine, because it is seen, it is therefore established as my body. That's the claim. Nalima, Jaima, good to see you. So because I can see it, because I'm experiencing it, it is me. So, oh dear one, I've translated as follows. All of this from the void state to the play of the divine, including even that which is heretical or impure or improper, since it appears in consciousness, is verily established as my own body, for I myself am consciousness. This is the liberating teaching. And does it not sound quite familiar to you? Because when we were looking at the Shiva Sutra some time ago, you saw, remember in verse, there was that verse in the Shiva Sutra, Drishyam Shariram, verse 114, I think. Remember Drishyam Shariram? That verse said, if I see it, I am it. Drishya, to see something, means I am it. This is a strikingly contrasting claim to Advaita Vedanta, because Advaita Vedanta would say, dṛśyatvāt mityatva. If I see it, it's false. Right? If it's an object to me, then it's not me. That's step one in Advaita Vedanta. It's called Sankhya. First step is to realize that I, the witness self, the seer, am different from the seen. And because I am not the world, I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am not the ego, therefore, the mind, body, world, and ego are not me. It's very important. You push it away. See, Advaita Vedanta begins with pushing things away. Look, it's honestly, you cannot practice Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism, I think, in like a genuine and honest way without becoming, to some extent, a monastic. And I mean, when I say Buddhism, I mean Theravadan Buddhism or classical Buddhism. Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, of course, no problem. But they still are quite monastic anyway. But in any case, you start by being a monk, no? You have to have Viveka, Vairagya, the Shat Sampati, the Mumukshutvaha. So you have to be, to some extent, already willing to push things away. That's the classical Advaitic view. So I am not the mind, I am not the body, I am not the self, because I am aware of it and it is an object appearing to me. Step two in Advaita Vedanta, it goes one step beyond even Sankhya by saying, and these things don't exist, or they're illusory superimpositions onto Brahman. Like a snake is illusorily superimposed onto the rope, there is no snake, there is only a rope. Similarly, the mind, the body, the world are adhyasa. They are superimposed upon Brahman, which is pure non-dual consciousness. So they are a mistake, they are an error. The word here is called mityatva, which means falsity. So the mind, body, and world are false, the way the snake is false. Now, I'm not perceiving a false thing. Make no mistake. You can never perceive a false thing. Falsity is perceiving something falsely. So at every given point, you're perceiving Brahman. Make no mistake. It's not like you're perceiving an illusory second other than Brahman. You're experiencing Brahman, but Brahman is not the world. It's not the body. It's not the mind. In fact, until you know that, you don't know Brahman. Because until you know that there is no snake, you won't know the rope. And when you know there's a rope, you'll know there's no snake. So it comes through rejection. First you say the snake is not the rope. Then you say there is no snake. There never was, never will be. It's an illusion, mityatva. So the formula that we get in Gaudapada's Mandukya Karaka is dṛśyatvāt mityatva. If I see it, it's first of all not me, that's implied. But second of all, it is not. If I see it, it therefore doesn't exist. The world is void, the world is maya, it's an illusion. And that's wonderful. It's a powerful teaching. You can use it in many cases and it can be very powerful to you. Just realize that everything is so dreamlike. You know, the things that we take so seriously yesterday, we don't even think about today. You know, I remember one time I was on the balcony of actually Jim Morrison's apartment. He had long since passed away. But I was on the balcony of Jim Morrison's apartment down the street here in Westwood, telling my friend, if she breaks up with me, I'll never live another day. I'll die without her. Well, we broke up and like, who am I then? I'm still here. But we've all been there. No, we're like, oh no, what will happen to me if this or if that? But then years later, you look back and you're like, whatever, it was no big deal. But back then it was. So that's the idea of mityatva, you know, things seem like such a big deal, but then later you look back and you realize how dreamlike, how inconsequential. So that idea is important, that right now, the things in our life might not be as real as we think that they are. So mithyatva is powerful. This idea of dṛśyatvāt, mithyatva, if I see it, therefore it's false. That's a powerful idea. Also, falsity is premised upon changeability. Because the world is changing, nothing here is consistent. It's continuously changing. So our intuitions about truth are invariably connected to our intuition about eternity. So true love is a love that lasts, for instance. A love that doesn't last is not true love. So you can see the link. If something changes, it's not true. So because the world of the seen, basically everything, mind, body, world, because it's changing, it's therefore not real. Mithyatva. So you can reject it. But not altogether, because you're experiencing something, aren't you? So that's why I think even Advaita Vedanta will not say it's nothing. They'll say it's sat, asat, anirvacha. You can't quite say it isn't, but you can't quite say it is either. In any case, mithyatva means falsity. It's false. It's a false reading of the real. But here we have the literal opposite claim. As Mokshadas is pointing out, it's a claim of absolute radical acceptance. So you don't say not this, not this. You say this also, this also. You say iti, iti. So here you say, if I see it, it is, and it's me. So in the first view, if you see it, you say it is not because it's changing and it's not me. Right? Here you're saying, if you see it, it is, it exists, and it is me. That's the claim with dṛśyatvāt, dṛśyam śarīram. That's the formula we get in the Shiva Sutra. So everything you can see is your very own self. So this is a very deep teaching. So what is the self? Now, you'll see the self is here defined as consciousness. So I am consciousness. Mama, caitanyamātmanaḥ. Atmana means self. Mama means myself. So myself is consciousness. In other words, I am consciousness. I myself am consciousness. That's the claim. But what does it mean to be consciousness? To be consciousness is to include everything. Everything that appears must necessarily appear in consciousness. And we learned this from this verse, remember? Prakāśamanataya, that word, prakāśamanataya, means na prakāśa prakāśate. If it does not shine, it therefore does not exist. That which is not luminous will not shine. In other words, that which appears in consciousness is consciousness, and that which is outside of consciousness never appears and never exists. And the claim here is, it's not like if something is outside of perception, it doesn't exist. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying if something is outside of knowledge, it doesn't exist. Again, that's not what we're saying. It's not solipsism. Obviously, things exist that you cannot, have not, and will not see. Obviously, things exist that you have not, cannot, and will not know. But they still exist in consciousness as the unseen, as the unknown. But if it's actually outside of consciousness, then it cannot even in potential, in principle, be seen or known. So then how can you say it exists? If something is outside of consciousness, you're therefore saying it cannot be verified. And if it cannot be verified, what's the point in asserting it? Don't assert something that is not even a fact of consciousness. But if it's a fact of consciousness, then it's in consciousness. So now notice, in the previous dualistic view, there is a world and you are in the world. There is a body and you are in the body. There are 5 states of consciousness and you go into one after the other from time to time. But this is the opposite view. There is no space in the jars. The jars are in the space. You see? So it's not like the space is inside the jars. That would be the Shaiva Siddhanta dualist view. There is a self, it's inside the body, and maybe it's not so fair to say it's the Shaiva Siddhanta view. The Shaiva Siddhanta view is a bit more nuanced than just this. But my caricature of the view, it might be like, oh, it's a dualistic idea that there is a self in the body, there is a self in the world, there is a self in the 5 states of consciousness. However, flip the script. There is no self in the body. The body is an experience in the self. There is no self in waking, dreaming, or deep sleep. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are experiences that arise in the self. You see, so flip the script and you realize that you are consciousness. And so everything that is in consciousness, no? So right now when you look at the room, you see a bunch of things. But the important point here is that everything you see is in consciousness. And if you're consciousness, then you're looking at you. Isn't that beautiful? And we kind of feel this about our room, don't we? Like our bedroom, especially when we're teenagers, maybe if we were fortunate enough to have like our own space. We like kind of look at everything and we're like, this is me, I'm so cool. Right? Like our posters, our record player, our vinyl. Look, I have a long history of showing people my vinyl. Why? Because for a long time, I've just been really proud of my record collection. It might not be as good as Lana. I know she's a Brooklyn baby and she can play most anything. I probably could not play most anything. I just have a very specific vinyl record collection. Those of you who got that lyrical reference, my fam. But like the thing about the records is like it's an object, right? In what sense is it worth showing to other people in the sense that you think it represents you or something. But in some sense, you feel like the things in your room are you. Like the room is your own, like mental space, if you will. We were actually right. Metaphysically speaking, that's incredibly like accurate to say because everything that you see in the room is being experienced mentally, psychically. If every object is in space, the question to ask is, where is space? It's a profound question. Where is space? And you'll realize it's in the mind. Space is an experience in the mind. So every object that exists in space exists in the mind, since space itself exists in the mind as an experience. And of course, there are things that exist in the mental space that don't exist in the physical space, right, Natalie? Isn't that kind of eerie and beautiful to think about? And the meditation here is to think there are three kinds of space. Space number one is called Maha Akash in Sanskrit, physical space. Maha Akasha, Bhuta Akasha means physical space. So that car over there, those people who are putting something in the boot, but some people say trunk of the car. They're all in space, no? But that space itself is called physical space, Maha Akasha. That is in Chitta Akasha, mental space. The second kind of space is called mind space. Because, there are things in mind space that are not in physical space, like my thoughts, my emotions, my memories. They're not subject to intersubjective experience like that car or those people. But they're still in the mind space. And where is the mind space? It's in consciousness. Chidakasha. So Mahakasha, physical space, is in Chitakasha, which is mental space, and Chitakasha is in Mahakasha. Sorry, Chitakasha is in Chidakasha. Chittakasha and Chidakasha. So mind space and awareness space. So space is in space is in space. That's my haiku. Okay, it's not. I don't know what the meter for the haiku is, but that's my poem. Space is in space is in space. So the teaching here is that everything is in consciousness. Even the things you consider defilements, wine and people you hate, and I don't know, whatever it is that you don't like, the president, like whoever in this world that you don't like is as much you as everything else in the world is you. Because it's in consciousness. It's appearing in you as you. And that's why the word vimatipadamaṅga is so important. Oh, dear one, even the defiled, even the heretical, there's a left-hand path teaching almost. Because it appears in consciousness, is consciousness. Once I was sitting with my guru, and it was kind of like a public room. I don't know why I was prompted to ask this question in public, but we were talking about cows and all the holy things that come from a cow. And you know how we Indians, we revere cows, so we tend to consume all the excrements of the cow. Milk, we love it. Milk comes from cows, we love milk. From the milk, you get yogurt and you can get ghee. We love it. We ingest yogurt, we ingest ghee. We don't stop there though. We also ingest the cow urine and we might even take some cow dung because we consider all of those things equally holy. We can use the cow dung for gas to like cook things. We can make patties with it and put it on the walls to cool down our houses. It's a disinfectant, so we use it to clean our floors. All of that. And there's a scientific basis to all of these things. But when we worship Shiva, we pour cow urine and cow dung onto the lingam also. And then it mixes in with the yogurt, with the ghee, with the milk, and with the water. And then that can be consumed as charanamrita. And no Indian will bat an eyelash at this because they love the cow so much. The cow is so holy that the very excrement of the cow is considered holy, right? So we're having that discussion. We were talking about the cow and whatnot. And of course, I'm in the very like tantric world of doing, kaula puja and whatnot. So my guru knows this and like the public doesn't. But anyway, so I asked my guru, I was like, so Maharaj, if the cow is so holy, and if the things that come from the cow are so holy and are worth ingesting, then how much holier must be the things that come from a human body, such as human excreta, human urine, human sweat, human sexual fluids, all of those things, just like the cow's fluids, are equally divine, are they not? And then I remember the room bristled. Like everyone is like, ah, like the idea. Of course, what are you gonna expect? This is a Kaula idea. And my teacher didn't bat an eyelash. Of course he wouldn't. He knows. He's the one taught to me. Then he said to me, that's because in Tantra, everything is seen as divine. He said that's the tantric view, and that's because in Tantra, everything is seen as divine, including those things that the mind rejects as defilement. That doesn't mean you go and this is your lunchbox now. Obviously not. But the point is just that don't see anything as other than God. Doesn't mean you will like do anything different. You'll still live your life the way you would. It's you still put your shoes on your feet and your hat on your head. But both shoes and hat are seen as equal. They're seen as God. So people that you hate, things that you feel are impure, that too is in consciousness. Therefore, it's your very own body. So remember, this is the absolute opposite view of rejection. It's the view of absolute acceptance. And there's a verse, I don't have it right now on hand by memory, but if I remember correctly, it's from the Swabodhodaya Manjari, And you know what the verse says? It says, either you reject everything like a Buddha or you accept everything like a Bhairava. Contrasting the two positions. I don't think the words are necessarily that contrasted. In the tantric tradition, there are Bhairava types. So yeah, Mokshadas is saying, I accept. But here's the thing, don't get caught in the middle. That's the only problem. If you accept some things and reject other things, you're fucked. Or as my kids will say in middle school, you're cooked. You're cooked, fam. If you take one thing and you reject everything else, you're doomed. And that's the problem. We say, I am this body only. I am this mind only. That's where we get cooked. So it would be better to renounce everything then. Rather than claiming this body and this mind, renounce everything. Either I am none of it or I am all of it, as one sadhu said. So if I'm all of it, then I am this body, I am this mind, but also I am that body and that mind. I am everything. So the path of the Bhairava, to use that phrase from the Swabodhodaya Manjari, which I'm just kind of barely remembering, reject everything like a Buddha or accept everything like a Bhairava. If you accept everything, it has to be radical. It has to be absolutely uncompromisingly radical, which means that you see everything as yourself. You are embodied as everyone, as everything. Okay, that's a profound teaching. So one last thing, and then we'll break for the day. So we get this idea. I am rich, I am feeble. I am affectionate, I am happy. I am living, I am the void. The self is seen in these 6 states. So I think it's a very beautiful verse because it gives us this model, which is what Abhinavagupta is referring to. So it's like the silkworm with the cocoon. So the jala kara jalena. So here it is. Sampanno means rich. Like rich refers to things. So here this is vastu. Vastu means objects, items that you have. So I am rich, or contrastingly, I am poor. So the statement I am rich or the statement I am poor is a statement that is made with reference to your bank balance. It's also a statement made in reference to your physical possessions. Usually. Usually. Not always. I mean, unless you're like, very spiritually evolved person, you won't consider wealth objects, but most of us consider wealth to be like I mean in the naive sense of material wealth. So that's what this word means. Sampanno means sampanno'smi, I am rich. The next word, kṛśo'smi. Kṛśa means weak or feeble. So I am weak. And the contrasting statement, I am strong. This applies to the body. So vastu means stuff. Deha means body. So the statements I am rich and I am poor apply in the objects. Statements I am strong and I am weak apply to the body. Statements I am affectionate, I am happy apply to the mind. Right? So the mind is, what do you call it? Like sometimes sad, sometimes happy. It loves, it hates. All of that's in the mind. I am affectionate, I am happy. That's in the chitta. I am living. Prāṇimi. I am alive. I am breathing. I am energized. That's in the prana. So I am alive or I am dead even. Those are 2 statements you can make in the prana. I am the void. That's also a statement that you can make. For instance, when you're in deep sleep, no? In deep sleep, you experience yourself, nirbhogata, without anything. So this is called the void. So I am the void. That's something also you can say, I am the void. And what is the self? The self is the one who can be seen in all of these states. So the self is the void. Because after all, it's in the void that the self is perhaps most obvious. It's in the void when the self shines brightest, arguably. In deep sleep, you recognize that you are. Then in prana, don't you feel sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're excited, energized, sometimes despondent? That's in the prana. Then mind, you feel yourself in your thoughts. I'm happy, I am sad. But also you feel yourself in the body, and also you feel yourself in your stuff. So these are the 6 layers of the self. And we think we are our things, and we are our body, and we are the mind, and we are the prana, and we are the void. What Shankara is going to do in his commentary of the Taittiriya Upanishad is he's going to try to reject the sheets. Now, in that version, you start with the body, Annamaya Kosha. Then you move into the prana, Pranamaya Kosha. Then you move into the mind, Manomaya Kosha. Then you move into the intellect, which is called the Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then you move into the void, Anandamaya Kosha. So the only real difference is there's no Vastu in the Taittiriya Upanishad model, and Chitta and Prana are switched. And there's an additional part of Chitta. Chitta is called Mano, but now Mano has intellect also, Vijnana. So instead of Vastu, they put Vijnana. So here we drop Vijnana because it's already implied in Chitta. Chitta means Mano, it means Buddhi, it means all the things that the mind implies. But we also add Vastu. So this is a different model. But not only is the model different, the approach is different. Shankara will say these are illusory. They are Maya koshas. They are illusory sheets, which is not the language of the Taittiriya Upanishad. Taittiriya Upanishad actually agrees with this take. In the actual Sanskrit, the Taittiriya Upanishad says, yes, body is Brahman. Yes, energy is Brahman. Yes, mind is Brahman. Yes, intellect is Brahman. Yes, void is Brahman. Yes, Brahman is Brahman. That's what the Taittiriya Upanishad actually says. But Shankara's commentary is mind is not Brahman. Sorry, body is not Brahman. Mind is not Brahman. Sorry, body is not Brahman. Energy is not Brahman. Mind is not Brahman. Intellect is not Brahman. Void is not Brahman. Only Brahman is Brahman. Hence, Shankara's school is Advaita. Oh, sorry. Knocked my microphone. Brahman only is the view. So here we're saying, yes, the self is the void. Yes, the self is prana. Yes, the self is the mind. Yes, the self is the body. And yes, the self is my stuff. But why did I stop here? My stuff is outside of my body, right? But it's not outside of my consciousness. And so if my consciousness included the void, if it included prana, if it included the mind, if it included the body, why did it stop there? Shouldn't it go on to include my things? And if it can include my things, why did it stop at my things? Shouldn't it go on to include all things? Do you see the logic here? It's literally the opposite logic. Instead of rejecting things one by one, you start accepting things one by one. So you're pulling the links of the chain closer and closer until you realize, oh my God, I am embodied as the whole thing. So if you feel like a silkworm inside the void, inside the energy, inside the mind, inside the body, then you'll be wrapped in your cocoon, maybe only to die there. Don't ever think you're in the void. Don't ever think you're in the body. Rather think the void, energy, mind, and body are in you, and therefore they do not limit you. This body that we call my body is not the limit of your being. After all, can't you look over there? The very fact that you can experience over there means that's in you also. It's in your experience. So that's the teaching, I think, in verse 32. It references this idea of the 6 levels of the self. So it's a tantric teaching, 6 levels of the void. Sorry, 6 level of the self. Sorry, and it's tantric because it's about acceptance and about expanding. I guess I'll say this: the self is elastic. So when he says the self is seen in these 6 states, he means to say virūpākṣa, that is, means to say that you can actually play with this. You can expand yourself. I've given the example before. If you take your car to be who you are and somebody scratches your car, you'll wince as if somebody scratched your body. You'll feel the pain of it because you're able to expand yourself to include the car. If a mother gives birth to a child, what happens to that child, the mother will feel is happening to herself. So the selfless love of the mother is actually kind of selfish because she sees the child as herself. She's expanded her concept of the self to include the child. That's why you get helicopter parents and whatnot. You know, it's very funny. Sometimes parents didn't get a chance to, like, I don't know, go to dance class or something, but they always wanted to be a ballerina. Then when they have a child, they're like, now my child has to be a ballerina. Hare, the child has no interest in ballet whatsoever. But no, no, when I was in Soviet Russia, I didn't have the opportunity. Or when I was in Mao's communist China, I couldn't do it. So now we're in America. You know, we made all these sacrifices. So we live in the suburbs. We have a nice house. Now you must go to ballet. And the kid is like, I don't like it. But I never had the chance. So now, what broken logic? So yeah, you never had the chance, so now I have to do it. But the reason why parents often insist upon these things is because they're living through their children, in a sense. So the children, therefore, are an extension of the parent's self. See how elastic the self is? It can extend into your car, into your record collection. It can extend into your children. Can't it expand further? Yeah, Tatiana. I actually know a lot of my friends are also Russian and they're playing classical piano. They're great pianists, really excellent piano players. And a lot of them will say like, "Oh, my mother didn't have this opportunity, so now I have to." I teach at a middle school, so I see this a lot. So anyway, um, the point here being, don't think the self is stuck anywhere. You have the power to push it beyond. Yeah, to push it beyond and you even to draw it. Yeah, all the Russians in the room like cello over piano? What? Anyway, you can withdraw the self like a turtle withdrawing its limbs into the shell, or you can project the self. So the claim that's being made here in the virūpākṣapañcāśikā is project. And then you'll be able to move mountains. Why? Because you are those mountains. Ramdas, the Baba Ramdas, the American spiritual teacher, he says something quite interesting. He says when you get to the place where you can move mountains, you will no longer want to because you'll realize you're the one who put them there in the first place. That's a beautiful understanding of siddhis. When you get to the point when you can master and create and destroy the whole world, you won't do anything because you're the one who created and destroyed the whole world already. Like you're the one who made everything the way that it is. Why would you want to change anything? That's the idea. If you were really God, you wouldn't want to change anything because you're the one who made everything what it is. So that's what happens in the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. Like there's a bait and switch. Indra wants to be powerful. He wants to move mountains. But as Baba Ram Das pointed out, when he finally realized what it would take to move mountains, he no longer wanted to move them because he had discovered something far deeper. Just being and being all pervasive is the greatest power ever. Not the power to change this or change that. In fact, when I am everything, I love everything. It's only when I have this self hatred that I want other people to come into my life or get out of my life, that I want some things here and less things there. It's only when I feel an other to the world that I try to manipulate the world. But when I am embodied as the world, I don't need to use occult powers to do this or do that, to try to get followers or to impress people. Today I saw on Instagram there was an Indian TV show where somebody was demonstrating a siddhi. He was like lifting a rock on TV, and then the caption was, "Little did they know that the camera can also record strings." And you could see this just so funny, like the camera angle changed, and you could see the two strings holding the rock, and this guy is like doing this like kind of thing, and the rock is floating, and you can see the strings. I'm sure the in-person audience like maybe couldn't because they were like clear strings, but the camera caught the strings, which is so funny. So yeah, so that's a good question. Is ambition therefore erased? Yeah, in a sense. I mean, ambition as we know it is erased, but activity is not ended, right? There's no end of activity. So you know what will happen? Your life will just unfold. In other words, if you are meant to write the next great like classical music masterpiece, you will. And if you are meant to, I don't know, rule the entire universe, or if you are meant to just sit in a cave, like you will. Natalie's like, sign me up, maybe. You can. You have the regal bhava. But like, whatever it is that your life is supposed to be, like whatever you are going to do anyway, you will. It just won't be ambition anymore because there's nothing left to gain from it, nothing left to lose from it, except the unfoldment of your own natural being, your swabhava or swadharma. So that being said, this is not the end of activity. In fact, arguably, it's the beginning of activity because we've now stepped out of our own way. So, Ace is asking, how does one, for example, be a political leader without ambition? It's a good question. Maybe the answer is you can't. Oh, blows my mind. You keep sneaking in here. Oh my God. Sorry, Ma. I saw you wanted to come to the satsang yesterday. It was still going on. It's just that no, no, it's okay. I didn't see your message in time. But you're always welcome, Ma. Text me directly next time, okay? I sometimes miss messages in the Discord. Tatiana's like, oh, congratulations, Tatiana. What a beautiful day to launch a food truck. Tomorrow um is eighth day of Navaratri. And also Saturday is going to be Tara Jayanti, no? Saturday is Ram Navami and Tara Jayanti. It's very powerful. Such a good time. But yeah, so congratulations on your food truck and may it go beautifully and may Mother bless all your endeavors. And also those of you who want to be political leaders, may Mother bless all of those endeavors also. But the argument here is that the food truck will happen. The political leading will happen. But Plato, it's very interesting. Plato's family was an aristocratic family. And so they very much wanted him to be involved in politics. So they tried to urge him to like get into the Senate and like be involved. And he, after all, he's interested in the philosopher king, no? He just doesn't want to be the philosopher king. He's the philosopher, but doesn't want to be the philosopher king. He thinks the king should be a philosopher, but it ain't him. And also, he might also be against democracy. Because democracy, it's a bit problematic sometimes, right? And Plato might have been against it actually. He wanted a philosopher king. Just like how slowly he says it with all that like Guru Bhava, just like slowly each word is like pace, and you never expect that. And you're like, wow, it's so good. Anyway, so maybe Plato didn't agree with the Athenian democracy. After all, only men could vote, and he felt it was about money. And Plato wasn't into democracy probably at that time. Maybe that's why he didn't do it. But even if he was, he didn't feel like it was his role to be involved in politics. Maybe because he felt like you have to have ambition to be in politics. So to your question, Janam, maybe yeah, mob rule. But maybe if you what do you call it? Like had ambition, you would want to be a politician. Maybe if you had no ambition, you wouldn't want to be a politician. And it seems like Plato didn't want to be a politician. But what did he do instead? He went and started a school, right? Like he started the academy. And so what's the academy then? Well, it's ambition, no? But no, it's not. It's not ambition. It's inspiration. Pratibha. So anybody will have inspiration. Anybody who has that inspiration will act. Only that action is coming from God, not from you. So again, it's not the end of action, but it might be the end of ambition. That's what we're saying. But now I think that a politician of obviously can be spiritual. Everyone can be spiritual. Why? Because won't God like express as that too? And even an ambitious politician is God's expression. So there will always be everything, right? Oh yeah, like but then Rama and Krishna, it's a very interesting question. They're kings, but they didn't have ambition. Neither of them tried to like conquer or whatever. They just did their dharma as per their position in life, you know. So Rama, Yudhishthira, all of these people, you can't quite see them as ambitious in the same sense as other kings in their time were, right? But again, anything and everything can and will happen. That's the important point. But in our own sadhana, in our own life, through realizing that I am everything, I no longer ask this question. What should I be? Well, I'll be whatever it is the overall whole demands me to be. In other words, I will express myself spontaneously and naturally with nothing to gain and with nothing to lose. Similarly, I won't ask what other people should do either, because they're doing exactly what the overall harmony requests them to do. So, no, capitalism itself works because God put it there. That's another thing. When you have this state of realization, you'll be like, actually, everything is fine. The greediest politician, the most ruthless war general, the most charitable social worker, they're all there because it's God's play. Everything is perfect. Everything is perfect, and for this to work, it must work in all contexts at all times. Only then can something be considered spiritually valuable. So, what does it mean for this to work? Total radical acceptance of everything everywhere, which does not mean not resisting oppressors. It does not mean inaction. You might have to fight a war, as Arjuna himself had to fight a war, but no longer will you have any hang ups about it. See, so having said that, I think we'll close with this idea that there are 6 layers of the self. Chitti, consciousness, chit. Then the self, chit, will express itself as void, shunya, which will then express itself as prana. Tatiana, good to see you. Nice to see you. Jaima, Jaima. Will express itself as void, will express itself as energy, will express itself as mind, will express itself as body, and will express itself as stuff. So these are the 6 layers: consciousness, void, consciousness, void, prana, energy, body, sorry, mind, body, stuff, vastu. These 6 things. And you'll find them in verse 3 of the virūpākṣapañcāśikā. You'll find it also in verse 32 of Abhinavagupta's Paramarthasara. Okay, let's call it a day now. And putting everything together, we now have 7 concepts to take away with us. 7 categories of tantric thought. The first was about God and the 5 heads of Shiva. That was number 1. Yeah, right, Ruth? Isn't that Ruth is making a really good point here. It's all so complex, but somehow um so simple. It's like just like so direct. But anyway, it's so wonderful that we get to have this conversation together. So that's the first thing is Shiva and the 5 heads. The second thing were the bhuvanas, sorry, the kalas, the tattvas, and the bhuvanas. So we learned those. Then we learned about the malas. The malas are the 3 impurities that cause the soul to be bound or feel bound. Then we learned about the 6 layers of the self, which we learned about today. And then we learned about the 4 states of consciousness, or the 3 states of consciousness and the 1 state holder, which we learned last week. So now you have 7 concepts: God, Kala, Tattva, Bhuvana, Mala. What will we call this one? The 6 layers of the self, and the Avastha, the 4 layers of the, not layers, but states. Yeah, so 7. You've got 7 concepts now, and in the next class, maybe we'll take up an 8th. But having had all these categories of tantric thought, you can see now why this is such a great introductory text, because it's just introducing you to concepts which are founded upon the older tradition and yet innovated upon in order to make for a more non-dual revelation. So with that, we'll close. Thank you all so very much for coming. Today is the 7th day of Navaratri, devoted to Kala Ratri. So I pray that all of this will be an offering at her lotus feet, that goddess who is the dark night embodied. Om Jaya Twang Devi Chamunde Jaya Bhutapaharini Jaya Sarvagate Devi Kala Ratri Namostute Kala Ratri Namostute. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam. Astu. Jai Ma. Thank you.